Yeah, let's start. Hi everyone. Mag-English ako ah.
Yeah.
Hindi na Tagalog. Hi everyone. Good evening to the folks in the States. And good morning to everyone in the Philippines. And thank you for kind of introing us, Charlene. My name is Adine Tayag. I'm a member of the Malaya movement. And it's a movement based in the US to resist fascism and advance genuine democracy in the Philippines. We're super excited to co-host Gardens of Resistance, a Makisasaw recipe book launch, and stories of solidarity in the Philippines with our friends here at Food Sari-sari, Gantala Press, and if she is coming, Astig Vegan. So before we go into our program and hear from speakers and hear a bit about the creation of the series, I want to bring us back to the purpose behind, a bit of the purpose behind the series and really the purpose of this gathering tonight. We're here because urban poor communities in the Philippines are resisting state oppression and hunger caused by an unjust system and worsened by a failed pandemic response. The Philippines is named has one of the worst government pandemic responses in the Asia Pacific. Really it's the work, the sweat, and the spirit of the Filipino masses that is ushering genuine change in their communities. And that's how the series came to be, and that's how we all came to be here tonight. A little bit about Malaya movement. Our aim is to pick up the fight against fascism faced by Filipinos in genuine solidarity. So since our founding, thousands of Filipino Americans, Phil-Ams, and Filipino immigrants, Phil-Ims, across the US have joined forces to ensure that fascism in the Philippines, which has a global reach beyond the territories of the Philippines, to make sure that it doesn't go undeterred and unfought by the people. Malaya movement has accomplished so much in the last 4 years, including progressing our campaign to suspend US funding assistance to police and military in the Philippines as perpetrators of human rights violations. That's why we're excited to co-host this with the very people in the Philippines resisting state oppression on the ground. And we're excited to help connect you all to their work. And the book, the recipe book, the series is available here in the States. So learn more about how y'all can get a copy for yourselves. So now I'm gonna pass it off to my friend and fellow Malaya member, Charlene, who will be taking us through tonight's program. Thank you, Char. Go ahead.
Thanks, Audine. So, we don't need to show that slide. But thanks, Elaine. So, hi, everyone. I'm Char. And I just want to say that I'm really happy to see everyone here. It's a gathering of friends, as they say in the US, mga kasama. I think, it's one thing to believe that everyone is, everyone has equal human rights. And it's another thing to live so that people actually enjoy their human rights. And I think everyone here is joined by that desire that everyone has the right to eat and everyone has the right to the city. So I call you all kasama, and it's my privilege to be introducing each of you to speak today. So first off, I'd like to invite Gantala Press, Faye. So Gantala Press is an independent, nonprofit, volunteer-run Filipina feminist press that centers women's stories and issues in their projects and in their participation in people's movements. They believe in the potential of feminist publishing as a social practice and in solidarity work with women artists and collectives as vital political action. Go ahead, Faye.
Hello. Good morning from Quezon City, Philippines. I am Faye of Gantala Press. We're a feminist small press that was formed in 2015 in response to the lack of books made by women. So Makisasaw sprung from Gantala Press's friendship with me and my Vegmouth and Good Food community. In 2017, the three groups organized Food for Peace, an information and fundraising drive for internally displaced persons from the Marawi siege. In Food for Peace, there was a discussion of how central food is in community survival, as shown by running community kitchens during disasters or growing community gardens from scratch. We also launched mga tutul apalapa, or recipes and memories of Ranao, our first cookbook which documents Maranao recipes. As we know, the Islamic city of Marawi was destroyed in the siege, and up to now, thousands of Maranao families are unable to return home. So Gantala Press initially sought to be a simple literary press only, no? But Food for Peace has expanded our portfolio to include political cookbooks. So in fact, one of our latest co-publications is a cookbook written by peasant women in the pandemic. In 2018, Gantala again collaborated with me and my Vegmouth in producing Makisasaw Volume 1. The impetus of this was the violent dispersal in July 2018 of the picket line held by workers of the NutriAsia food company, which is known for its condiments products. No? So the workers were protesting against contractualization, low wages, and poor working conditions, as well as union busting. In response to the call to boycott NutriAsia products, me and my Vegmouth held a plant-based condiments making workshop with the artist collective Saka. Later, Gantala proposed to collect the recipes in that workshop with additional recipes and essays into a book. So Makisasaw literally means to dip something into something, no? Such as food in condiments. So sausaw yung tuyo sa suka, ganyan. It also means to get involved in something one has no business getting involved in. So the book was me and my Vegmouth, and it was our way of engaging with very important issues as artists and as bookmakers. The book included essays on the rice crisis, food security, and vegan cooking, among others. Proceeds from the sale of the book contributed to the bail fund for arrested NutriAsia workers. Makisasaw Volume 2, meanwhile, is a product of the collaboration of various individuals and groups, particularly groups from the urban poor sector. Produced in support of community gardens and community kitchens, this volume indirectly sheds light on the equally important issues that most Filipinos in the cities face. These issues include poverty, homelessness, and displacement, which are all rooted in the fundamental problems of the country: the lack of land to till, a backward economic system that continues to mire our farmers, fisher folk, and agricultural workers in suffering and misery, unequal development, the plunder of natural resources by foreign corporations, and militarization in the countryside lead to the displacement of thousands of farmers who are forced to come to the cities to survive. Some manage to find work in factories like the NutriAsia unionists. Many others, like the poor families that occupied the unused government housing complex for soldiers in Bulacan in 2017, are red tagged. To make sausaw is to touch the surface of things only, and that is what the Makisasaw series offers, at the least. No. It shows that the plants we enjoy as food grow from earth that has long been enriched by the blood and sweat of the toiling masses. Coming together today to celebrate this book, the product of the hard work of many individuals and communities, gives us hope on the power of caring, of being present, and standing in solidarity with the people. Salamat po.
Wow, Faye, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now that we've listened about the book, we've invited a dear friend of Faye's, Chester Arcilia, to give us a sort of political understanding, a political analysis of the context to sort of frame the discussion that follows. We're medyo kilig about having Chester here because we were passing around his papers earlier on the pandemic to get a grip, and we believe his contribution as both an academic and an activist is much needed at this time. So to formally introduce him, let me read out his bio. Chester is an associate professor of economics and urban studies in UP Manila. His work focuses on urban marginality and right to the city struggles. His current research locates radical urban poor and housing politics with a global history of housing financialization and gentrification, and on feminist homemaking. So welcome, Chester, and thank you.
All right. Thank you, Charlene. First, let me thank Tay and Charlene for inviting me to talk briefly about community gardens. My class on urban poor in the Philippines looks at different struggles of the poor. And in one of our semesters, we've partnered with Kadamay to develop an urban poor gardening module for urban poor communities, right? So this is very close to my heart. What I want to do with the rather 15 minutes that was allotted to me is to contextualize community gardening and contribute to the call to politicize the everyday, right? I think this is a not very highlighted aspect of urban poor politics that's very important to highlight, right? So I'm forwarding a notion that these every day needs to be politicized because they actually sustain the much more public politics of contestations of the urban poor, including barricades and the Occupy movement, right? So what I want to do in the 15 minutes is to contextualize community gardenings, both from the macroeconomic situation in the Philippines, right, which is increasing precarity for workers, which has been described by the earlier speaker, and the big housing need for the urban poor. And then look at how urban poor communities have been responding to that threat. These responses are those responses that are largely visible to us as outsiders of slums, meaning that these are what we see from the outside, right? And then I digress a little bit to look at the COVID response of government, but this has been mentioned by both Charlene and the other speaker. Sorry, I have a problem with names. Sometimes I just miss people's names. It's nothing personal. And then I discuss why community gardenings are, I think, very important as urban poor resistances. So I come from a background of economics, so I'm going to be showing some economic data, but I will try to explain them as simple as possible. So let me read this. This is very important, and I kind of like reading stuff from the World Bank when it makes our point, because most people believe the World Bank, right? And they'd rather listen to the World Bank than listen to people's stories. So I like to highlight World Bank reports when they support the positions of the grassroots, right? So between 2001 and 2016, the country's real gross domestic product more than doubled, growing by an average of 5.4% per year. Labor productivity also significantly increased during this period. By contrast, however, real wages remained flat in the same period, with 7 out of 15 years registering negative growth rates. I'm going to pause there and say that the usual assumption of many economists and state planners is that when labor productivity goes up, their share of the economy must go up. Right? But it's happening in contrast in many countries in the global south, where labor is contributing a much bigger portion of the economy, but they're receiving less and less of the economic output, which means that a lot of the economic output is actually concentrated in the hands of huge capitalists. Right? Now, let me continue. Except for public workers, this pattern holds across employees' levels of education, the nature of work, and the class of work. So it affects everyone. Right? Informal employment represents 76.3% of the total employment in the country. And moreover, informality, of course, across age and education groups, around 30.8% and 63.2% of the employed college graduates and undergraduates respectively have informal employment. This is very important because most people believe that education is a way out of poverty. But in fact, the numbers say that even if you're a college graduate, even if you reach college, it's not enough to get out of poverty. There's a structural problem that prevents the poor from moving out of poverty. Now, what's happening when people have very precarious livelihoods and wages, right? Of course, they can't buy decent housing, right? So there's a very huge housing need in the Philippines, and that in the latest data, I think this is around 2014, that around 43% of Filipino urban residents live in slums. Right? In Metro Manila alone, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies estimates that 37% of the population, or over 4 million, live in slums, and that there's a slum growth rate that's expected to be 8% annually. This is not very surprising because the Philippine government has not allocated sufficient funds for public housing. It has the lowest budgetary allocation relative to the region for the last 20 years. So let me talk about socialized housing. The government has a socialized housing program. It has a housing program for the poor, right? And how does it work? It works like a market, right? So on the supply side, you have private contractors supplying the housing, right? So they purchase the land, they develop the site, they do the construction, they do everything and the financing, and they sell the housing stock to the National Housing Authority. The National Housing Authority then sells the housing stock to informal settler families, right? So the NHA really is an agency mandated to ensure housing for the poor. Is actually an intermediary between the private contractors and the demand. Now, the demand is also created in a sense by the NHA because it will evict people living in in-city slums in order to sell them the off-city resettlement. Right? So this is how it works. But there's a very big problem if you begin to link livelihood precarity with housing in the Philippines that's supplied by the private contractors. I'm sorry about all the lines there, but let me explain that a little bit. The first three lines below are the average incomes of the poorest 30% Filipinos, right? So the lowest line, the average income of the poorest 10% Filipinos from 2000 to 2015. And then the next line, the next 10%, and the next line, the next 10%, right? Now, if you use the global rule of thumb, that affordability is 3 times the incomes of families, right? The next 3 lines, the dotted lines, right, in between, are the affordability levels of the poorest 10% Filipinos, poorest 30% Filipinos. And then the topmost line is the cheapest housing price, is the housing price ceiling of housing for the poor, right? So that's the prices of the housing for the poor. And the lines never intersect. The topmost line never intersects with any of the affordability levels of the targeted poor Filipinos. It means that since 2000 up to the present, the housing program that is devised by the Philippine government has never been affordable to its target Filipino urban poor. Right? In fact, if you take a look at the latest data that I was able to compile, sorry about a lot of the numbers, the summaries is in the orange box. The cheapest housing provided by the government, which is off-city, is 240,000 pesos. And it's unaffordable even to the poorest 40% Filipinos, right? So it's off-city because you have to decrease the cost of land. So you locate very far from the city centers in order for the land cost to go down. Right? So, okay, so what's happening given the livelihood precarity and the unaffordable housing program of government and the huge housing needs? So you have your huge housing needs, and then you have, in the past decade or so, there increased number of evictions of the poor. Right? This requires a separate discussion altogether because of the influx of overseas Filipino remittances, the influx of Chinese capital, the financialization of the housing market and the real estate market. They're all driving the prices of in-city land up. And a lot of the land that is targeted is public land that's occupied by slum dwellers. So you want to clear off that land if you're government. You clear off that land in order to partner or sell that land to real estate, and you evict urban poor communities and transfer them and sell them the homes that is produced off city, right? So the urban poor that are evicted necessarily don't want to live in off-city areas because of the lack of livelihood. So there's very low occupancy rates, right? So there are a lot of empty housing units. In 2017, almost 46% of the housing that was built in the last 5 years are empty. Amortization rates are up to 92% in terms of inefficiency. People are not paying their amortization in the resettlement sites, and there are very low retention rates. There's a study by the Department of Social Work, by the National Anti-Poverty Commission, that almost 50% of those who are resettled move out of the resettlement within 5 years. Right. Of course, this is not unique to the Philippines. It's reflective of the global phenomenon of empty housing that's occurring in the United States, in Latin America, in Europe, and so on. So there's a housing crisis. On the one hand, people need housing, but there's another crisis: government building houses that the poor don't want to live in. So you're building empty homes using taxpayers' money. Right? And the private contractors are benefiting because the housing authority pays for those houses, whether they're lived in or not. So how do the urban poor respond? They respond in basically 3 ways. One is that they remake or make their homes in slums. Right? This is reflective of what Asif Bayat, a sociologist from Latin America, observed, that the poor would often quietly and often without any organization encroach the city, right? So today they would build put up tarpaulins in a wall, and then tomorrow they have a home, right? But they're able to do that because they're breaking up the notion of shelter, right? Their notion of shelter is different from middle class notions of shelter. Right? When we say shelter as middle class, it has to have a bathroom, a sala, a living room, a sleeping quarter, and so on and so forth. Right? For the poor, it's just a space to survive. Right? So the notion of shelter is broken up. That's why they can build a house overnight, and they slowly develop that over time. Right? Sometimes the homes are even mobile, like the pictures that are shown there. People live in pedicabs. People live in their caritons, like the homeless in the United States with their shopping carts, right? This is the first notion of how the urban poor deal with that crisis. The second is that this has been developed in the last decade, people's planning. It's a bottom-up process where communities collectively plan and implement their on-site or near-site resettlement as an alternative or a challenge to state relocation program. This is, of course, constrained by the lack of affordable land and resources, because ultimately people's plans need to buy the land, right? So it's unable to accommodate all affected families, particularly the poorest of the poor. Some analysts are claiming that it in fact divides the poor into those who can pay and those who cannot pay, because the people who live in urban poor communities are not all necessarily poor in the sense that they cannot afford amortization payments. The third is a much more radical politics that has been honed by the Kalipunan and the Mayang Mahihirap, from barricades to Occupy movements, inspired by the 2010 barricade of San Roque. And then it moved on to Occupy empty housing in 2016. So it's a radical politics because it deterritorializes capital and elite space, the occupation, and it questions property rights, and the poor were able to radically redistribute state resources. I suppose the speakers from Pandi may better describe the story behind Occupy, right? But it has been subjected to diverse state containment tactics, extrajudicial killing, legal arrest, red tagging, surveillance, harassment, and so on and so forth, right? So this is the context of the community gardens. So now a bit of a digression. How has the government responded to the COVID situation here? It has been described earlier that it has one of the longest lockdown globally. And of course, the lockdown decreased mobility. You decrease mobility, you decrease the circulation of surplus, and the poor are the severest hit. Right? So the basic solution of government was stay home as it waited for the vaccines to be rolled out. Right? But staying home in slums is not possible in the way that middle class medical practitioners and health practitioners conceive of it. Why is that? Because almost 30% of families, often low income households, have less than 4 square meters per person shelter space. This is less than the required for physical distancing, right? And because slum shanties are small and hot, many residences survive by staying outside, right? So they make tambay, right? So what we see as people loitering around is actually a way for people to survive their small homes, right? But in many slums during the COVID period, they were penalized by staying outside. So every time in San Roque, for instance, you get penalized by 200 pesos if you're caught loitering outside. And then you have increased unemployment. And the Philippines has one of the severest unemployments last year during the lockdown since the 1970s. Right? It's going to take a couple of years for the Philippine economy to bounce back to its pre-COVID situation. Right. So let me move to community gardens. I hope I still have time. Now, community gardens are very important to think about as resistances, because one, their intention is to respond to hunger and livelihood precarity. Right. So people need to survive. There's an intentionality to challenge that survival, and the production is based on collective production, and it's in a sense a socialized notion. It's based on skill and the availability that people can contribute, right? And it's feminist because it politicizes care work and revalues women's discarte in Filipino, or making do, in sustaining families given livelihood precarity. A lot of feminists are arguing that it's actually the women's work that's sustaining neoliberalism, not sustaining neoliberalism. It's allowing their families to survive despite neoliberal exclusions, meaning that it's always the women who find ways for their families to survive when their male partners are not able to find work within neoliberal economic production. And it's anti-capitalist because it reroutes food production value chains away from profit orientation. So the usual route is that it's produced within economies of scale in the agricultural areas, and middlemen will buy that and transfer it to the cities. And in the process, they gain a lot of profits, and they raise prices so much. And the farmers are really left with very little income. And it's the middlemen that actually make a huge killing in the food production market. But what community gardens are trying to do is that they're rerouting that value chain. They produce the food in city because it's possible to do that. Right? So it's meeting community needs up to a certain extent. And then it challenges the notion of space that it's imposed by the state and the elites. The elites would say, you cannot plant there because that land is not legally yours, right? So by contesting these notions, right? The people that are involved and the community that are involved, they develop a notion of radicalness that becomes a part of the everyday. And I'm arguing, and this is the last slide, that community gardening and many other collective engagements in slums that allow slum dwellers to survive must be politicized to develop what Kapsali calls insurgent practices. These are where individuals with different histories and politics, they disidentify with the dominant order and realize their shared exclusion and world-making capacities. And they transgress elite hierarchies and assert equality. Right? So these are very important in sustaining and defending urban poor spaces and sustaining barricades and occupied homes of the poor. Right? And for those of us who are outside of these spaces, they're actually showing us that it's possible to build cities that are based on meeting the needs of the community and that are inclusive and socially just. And we need to look at these spaces and the practices that are developed and learn from them so that we can better contribute to liberating ourselves for a right to the city struggle. Thank you. these are some of the references. So thank you.
Wow, maraming salamat, Chester. Chester will be here for the Q&A as well. But that was a really wonderful explanation of everything. And if you want to learn more references and get into economics or the understanding later, you can message Chester directly. So we go on to the portion where we introduce one of the many initiatives of which Chester speaks. They would know more, Pandi and others, but here we're offering Food Today, Food Tomorrow, which we are celebrating with this book. And so I asked Elaine to play a video that we've lovingly prepared for you.
Gusto po namin ipakilala ang bagong libro ng FTFT. Makisawsaw. Di ba yun yung gusto natin? Makisawsaw. Dapat makisawsaw ang mga tao sa mga issue. 'Di ba? Lalo na ang daming nagugutom ngayon, 'di ba? Hindi to problema ng isang sektor lamang. Ayun itong pong serye ng librong to, ang Makisawsaw. Nagpi-feature po siya ng iba't ibang recipes na vegan, no? Na hina-highlight ang sustansya ng gulay at prutas, ang pagkain ng gulay at prutas. Pero hina-highlight din ang issue na hinaharap natin pagdating sa sistema ng pagkain. Hina-highlight po natin yung kagutuman na nangyari nung pandemya, no? At yung ating proyekto na magkaroon ng community garden. Sinusulong natin na paramihin ang community gardens dito sa Metro Manila, no?
Ngayong araw na ito ay formal nating nilulunsad dito sa komunidad ng Bagong Silangan. Kasama ng PLM at ng 2K, Kalikasan at Komunidad, ang ating aklat na Makisasaw, Recipes and Ideas, the Community Gardens Edition. Ayun po.
Out namin dati sa kanya, Linap Maralita. Nagta-turnover po ng mga organic na ng mga prutas at gulay at bigas, no, sa mga iba't ibang community dahil nga kulang na kulang dati yung yung fresh na ingredients na ayuda, no? Noon kailangan palakasin ng ating mga katawan. So, yun po, regularly, no, for 4 months, nagbibigay po ang mga magsasaka, binibili po namin yan, mga donasyon, tapos tina-turn over sa communities. Tapos nagkaroon ng community kitchens, yung mga kusinang bayan, no, para magtulong-tulong ang bawat isa.
Organic ang pagtatanim at walang halong chemical. Matututunan natin magtanim na walang kahit anong chemical na hinahalo. Yun yung natutunan natin. Natutunan natin kung paano gumawa ng pataba. Natutunan natin yung hindi lang sa pagtinanim mo yan, ganyan lang yan. Natutunan natin kung paano siya alagaan.
Mga tanim kasi natin noong time na yon, walang kung anong support na pataba, pero pala nabigyan kami. So nagkaroon kami ng malawakang idea na kaya pala na ma-improve ang mga gawain natin sa pagtatanim.
Silang bayan kasi madaming nangyari. Sa Silang bayan kasi nag-start lahat. Nagkaroon ng circle of friends. Doon tumatag yung samahan namin. Doon lumawak yung pagkakaibigan namin. Na sa hirap ng buhay, natutunan namin manindigan. Na kahit walang-wala na hindi ka dapat lumugmok sa isang sulok lang. Dahil hanggat may araw may pag-asa. Saka sa hirap ng buhay, meron tayong stress reliever. Nakakatanggal siya ng stress talaga. Kahit sa akin. At saka malaking tulong ito sa atin lalo na sa hirap ng buhay. Ngayon na nagtataas ang mga bilihin. Wala ng pambili at dahil sa pandemic.
Okay. Pwede namang on loop. So that was the video to introduce the program Food Today, Food Tomorrow. And it's been a very life-giving project for everyone involved. No, we don't know where it's gonna go or how it is, but we just know that it's the right thing to do. So we move on to the center of our discussion today. We've prepared 2 interviews that we've chosen to do offline to present to you for the first time. And right after these 2 videos with members of the community to share the stories, we'll get into the Q&A.
Yung mga farmers na gumraduate, since start nung nag-graduate sila, yung iba kasi doon nag-back to work na sila. Yung iba naman, nag-extend pa rin naman ng pagtatanim. Tapos, yun nga, kagaya ko, sa akin meron pa rin naman. Pero yung iba talaga, yung siguro nakakapagtanim, yung merong expansion na lote, kagaya nung sa kapitbahay namin, gagawin sa amin, may expansion pa. Pero yung iba, as in, wala na talaga. Yung iba kasi, yung kagaya yung dun sa creek, space, baka hindi lote lang naman yung tinanim na nila doon. Kinuha na kasi nakasasasyon yun. Ginawa siyang covered court, palaruan ng mga bata. Kagaya naman dun sa may kapitbahay naman namin, kasi rentay lang din naman siya, yung space na tinataniman niya is kinuha na ng owner ng bahay, pinatayuan ng upahan. So ang natitira na lang, siguro yung dun sa may isang kagrupo ko, na bandang baba namin, tsaka ako, tapos yung Kilaweng, meron pa kasi dun sa bubungan nila, dun sila nagtanim. Ngayon, okay pa, pero mangilan-ngilan na lang, magaya kila si Joy, nagtatanim pa rin. Yung may mga space na lote, nakakapagtanim pa naman. Pero yung as in talagang wala, kasi karamihan sa namin, rental. So wala kang kakayahan na mag-sustainable na mag-farming. Ako kasi walang source of income Doon ako sa nanay ko nakatira. Si nanay ko may tindahan. Tinutulungan ko siyang mag-manage. Ganun lang siya. So, nag-aantay ako na mag-back to normal kasi babalik ako sa pagtitinda. Okay. Yun yung trabaho mo bago mo. Before naman siya ng-pandemic, talagang ang source of income ko ay nagtitinda. Yung iba sa kanila may maliit na tindahan. Doon nila ang nakuha yung pang-araw-araw nila. Yung iba wala akong balita yung iba yung iba back to work. Kung lalabas man, kailangan talaga may vaccine. Paano ka makakabili ng pangangailangan ng pang-araw-araw? Kung wala kang vaccine. Kasi kahit sa palengke ngayon, once na wala kang mai-present na vaccine card, hindi ka nila papagawa. Nagtutuloy-tuloy pa naman din kasi andyan pa naman ang FTFT sa pamamagitan ng FTFT. Yung food today, food tomorrow is sustain pa naman nila habang, sabi ko nga habang may FTFT, tuloy ang laban nito. Kasi may sumusuporta pa. Sabi ko gano'n sa kanila. Pag nawala kayo ng kapit, malamang paano tayo susustentuhan? Paano natin maipapanalo yung laban natin sa trabaho? So kailangan magsama-sama tayo. Pupunta tayo. Magkaisa. Kasi kung walang pagkakaisa, wala paano natin makakamtan yung panalo natin? Yung lagi kong sa kanila, mag-active kayo kung ganakan nyo. Sumuporta kayo sa FTF, PNM. Siguro ang message ko sa kanila, yung huwag nilang bitawan yung FTF. Huwag nilang bitawan yung pagtuwang nila sa PNM. Dapat lagi silang nakakapag. Kung magtatanim mo kasi bukod sa safe na yung kinakain mo, sariwa pa yung kinakain mo sa pamilya. Alam mo na walang chemicals kasi galing sa galing sa garden mo. Diba? Lalo na sa panahon ngayong pandemic, kailangan natin ng masustansyang pagkain, prutas, gulay. So kailangan talaga fresh yung ihain mo sa pamilya mo.
At fresh na fresh. Bagong pitas.
Mas maganda yun kaysa sa bibili ka sa palengke. Sa palengke hindi mo alam kung may chemicals na halo. Minsan kasi yung mga gulay, lalo na sa mga talong, nakabili ako sa talong ng palengke.
Ang talong kasi pag inisin mo lang, lalambot na siya eh. Pero yung nabili ko, matigas. Tapos sabi ko, parang may ano to ma. May something parang formalin. Yun yung inaano nila sa mga gulay para maging fresh. Mukhang fresh. Yun nga, mas malaking save. Bukod sa mga kasave ka ng pera or another foods. Mas malaking tipid pa siya.
Dami kasing smuggled ngayon eh, di ba?
Malaking tipid siya kasi sarili ng tanim. Walang hassle.
Nakakapag, ano ka pa, compost, gano'n?
Nagagamit ko pa siya sa yung mga nabubulok na pagkain. Oo, meron pa.
Nice.
Yun pa yung ginibilig ko sa mga.
Buti.
Tapos nakagawa din, yung mama ko kasi mahilig siya maggawa ng ano. Yun yung fertilizer, yung luya, sili, tapos gin. Ayun, nakagawa pa siya nun. Tapos yung ano, yung pampabunga, pamparami ng bulaklak, pamparami ng bunga. Yung galing sa mga prutas na matatamis.
Fermented plant,
fermented.
fruit juice, FFJ.
Nakagawa siya ng bunga.
Nice!
Tapos nag-ano rin ako sa sa Facebook, yung mga organic. Yun. Nagaan. Pero hindi ko pa siya na-try sa halaman. Ang sinubukan ko talaga, ang ginagamit ko yun talagang ginagawa na.
Eh, yung binhi mo, saan ka kumukuha?
May mga natira pa akong binhi noon eh.
Okay.
Tapos may yung kagaya ng okra na nagpagulang ako. Tapos yung buto noon, yun yung tinatago. May mga, yung kagaya mga pamangkin ko kasi mahilig sila mamili sa palengke. Yung mga buto noon, kinukuha ko yun. Kagaya mga kamatis, yung ganun.
Sa Kusbay, nakakakuha ka ba ng buto doon?
Oo. Hindi, marami ako nakuha ang buto doon na ginalot ko siya sa supo. Tinago ko siya. Yun, napakinabangan ko naman kasi yun yan, naitatanim ko siya. Okay.
Ganda talaga ng energy ni Letlet. Sorry. Yeah, it's always good to hear from Letlet. We have another video of Rhea and Thelma. So basically, I guess for more context, we wanted to check in after, is it 2 years or is it a year from the time that we began Food Today, Food Tomorrow.
Good morning po, ma'am. Ako nga po pala si Rhea Fajardo. Kasalukuyan po akong pumunta dito sa Manila. Sa hirap din po ng buhay sa probinsya, nagbakasakali po akong pumunta sa Manila para magtrabaho po. Tapos ngayon po, kasama ko lang po sa bahay, asawa ko po, ma'am. Wala po kaming anak. Isa rin po siyang driver. Driver po ng jeepney. Tapos ngayon po, dito nga po ako, ito yung sabi nga po nila pinagkakaabalahan ko, pero malaking tulong po sa amin itong pagpa-farm po namin dito. Isa po siyang pagkakabalaan na nakakatulong sa pamumuhay, hindi lang po sa libreng magtatanim ka po ng gulay, pero masarap din po siya kasi bukod po sa fresh pa po yung gulay, hindi ka na po bibili sa palengke. Nakakatipid din po. Nung wala pa pong pandemic, maganda po siya, nakukuha natin, na bibili po namin yung mga gusto namin. Parang may saya naman po pag biyahe. Nakakauwi rin po siya kahit papaano. Pero simula po nung pandemic na ilang buwan po sila hindi pinabiyahe, hindi pinabalik. Parang hirap po kami, lalo po sa amin na nangyupahan po. Parang hirap po kami na saan po namin kukunin yung pambayad sa upa, saan po namin kukunin yung pangkain namin. Tapos hanggang po sa may isa po siyang kapatid na natuluyan po namin. Pero nung bumalik naman po yung biyahe na mahigpit nga rin po, mahigpit naman po. Pero yung makabalik naman po, pero limitado po yung biyahe. Sa hirap po ng trabaho ngayon, ano pong gagawin namin? Kasi tatenga lang po kami sa bahay, sino magbibigay po ng pagkain namin? Saan po kami kukuha ng pang-upa sa bahay? Kasi wala rin po kaming tirahan ng sarili namin. Tapos ang nangyari po ngayon, napilitan po yung asawa ko magpabaksin. Sa katunayan po ma'am, kahapon po second dose namin. Nag-absent na naman po siya. Tapos yung sa pasahero naman po, limitado po. Dati, first side po, siyam-siyam po, ngayon, taglilima na lang po. Bali po, yung sa hirap po nila, minsan umuwi siya 300. Saan po mapupunta yun? Sa upa pa sa bahay, tubig ilaw, tapos yung pagkain pa po namin yun. Buti na nga lang po, meron pong mga sponsor din sa atin po na nagtatanim na nakakuha tayo ng bigas, dilata. Yun na rin po yung parang pinapangtawid na pang-araw-araw po.
Dati may trabaho po ako nung wala pang pandemic. Nasa isang salon po ako dito sa Quezon City po sa Sikatona, sa may Sidmore. Doon po ako nagtatrabaho ng 11 years. Pero wala naman po kami kasi doon benefits po talaga. Kahit wala po kami natatanggap doon. Kaya nung nag-pandemic, nawalan po lahat ng salon, nagsara. Hindi na po ako nakabalik doon kasi nung nandoon po ako, sahuran po ako nung panahon na yun na hindi pa pandemic. Nung bumalik ako, nung pwede na bumalik sa salon, is komisyona na. Ngayon, lugi po ako doon sa komisyonan kasi pag wala kang gawa, wala kang kita. Siyempre, ang laki ng pamasahe kasi nga, dubli-dubli ang pamasahe. Naglalakad po ako simula Est Avenue papuntang Sigmore. Binabalik-balik ko yun umaga-tapon kasi kailangan ko makatipid. Tapos ganun kasi komisyonan. Huminto po ako magtrabaho. Tapos yun, nakilala ko naman si Ma'am Sara. Yun, nag-farming naman ako. Yun. Pag katulad yung may mga ayuda po, at least may bigas po. Nakakalibre po ng Tapos pag may kusinang bayan po tayo, may mga gulay, okay naman po yun. Nakakatulong po yun. Malaking tulong po yun sa atin. Tapos pag yung mga farm, pwede naman po magpitas ka po para pang gulay. O yun. Malaking tulong po talaga yung pagpa-farm po namin. Talaga po. Kasi may gulay ka na, may pag marami kang makabenta ka, may pera ka na, pambiling bigas po. Ganun. Kaya malaking tulong po yung pagpa-farm po talaga. Yan yung pinagkakabalahan po namin ngayon. Kaya araw-araw nandito po ako sa magpa-farm.
Sa paghikayat naman po sa mga tao, ma'am, nakikita rin naman po natin na hirap din po yung tao. Kailangan din po nilang pagtiyagaan na magtanim para kahit papaano po may mapagkukuha na sila ng libreng gulay kasi sila magtatanim. Tapos makakabenta sila, may konting tulong na makakuha sila ng pangbenta, makakabili rin po sila ng ilang kilong bigas, pambiling ulam na rin kung nagsasawa na rin sa gulay. Tapos yung mga bagay naman po na ganyan, kailangan nating pagtiisan sa hirap ng ginawa po ngayon. Ang hirap po ng buhay, kailangan nating ipaglawan ka habang nabubuhay pa po tayo.
Kasi pag katulad yung mga bayaran po sa andyan po talaga na nai-stock minsan 4 na buwan, 3 buwan, wala ko nakakabayad. Kasi po, ang araw-araw ko po na pambili lang po ng bigas, ganun. Kasi wala pong trabaho talaga yung mga anak ko na regular. Ngayon, pag nakapasok po sila ng trabaho, yung sahod po nila talaga, inaano ko yung para pambayad po sa mga kuryente, sa tubig. Kasi po, yun po talaga, simula nang nag-pandemic po, talagang problema ko po talagang pambayad sa kuryente, tubig. Lalo po ako makikikabit lang po ako. Pag hindi ka makabayad po ng mabuti na nga lang kahit paano. Mabait yung kuhanan ko ng kuryente at sa tubig kasi stigmado ko po biyan ng Ma'am Sara. Pero dumarating po talaga na ayan, nandyan, pagagalitan ako kasi hindi nga ako nakakabayad. Pero sabi ko, gagawan ko ng paraan. Ayun, pag nagkakasahod naman yung mga anak ko, lahat yun, ibinabagsak ko sa kanya. Kahit wala po akong maibili na pambili ng bigas, basta bayaran ko po yung lahat ng kasi nga, mahirap din po kasi. Sa akin naman, okay lang naman kasi nakaka-taste. Malalaki na rin naman ang mga anak ko eh. Kaya sabi ko, taste lang po. Kasi sabi ko nung panahon naman na hindi pa pandemic, hindi naman ganito yung buhay natin, sabi ko sa mga anak. Kahit malalaki na yung mga anak ko, nakakatulong na sa akin, pero andyan po talaga kasi nasanay po sila sa masarap na buhay. Araw-araw may pera. Yung ngayon, talagang hinahanap po nila yan. Kaya sabi ko sa kanila, magsikap sila kasi para sa kanila din naman yun. Sabi ko gano'n. Kasi ako hanggang doon lang talaga. Kasi sabi ko, hindi ko alam kung kailan ako makakabalik sa trabaho.
Sa amin naman po, nakita ko po sa mga kasamahan, bukod sa ako po pinakabata sa kanila, nagagawa ko naman po makisabay kasi sanay na rin naman po akong makisalamuhan sa mas matatanda sa akin. Saka para sa akin po, mas gusto ko pong kasalamuhay mas matatanda sa akin. Para sa akin po kasi para ma-develop din po yung pagiging bata ko, para magiging mature din po yung pagiging bata ko. Nakikita ko lang po sa mga kasama ko, kahit hirap na hirap po sila, kahit wala man lang pambiling bigas. Ang nangyayari po, kung sino po yung nakakaluwag-luwag, kung sino po yung may bakanting, halimbawa bigas po, o sino may bigas dyan, baka naman may saing man lang dyan. Ang ginagawa po namin, pag mayroon po sa halimbawa sa FTFT po, pag mayroon po silang naibibigay, ang ginagawa po namin, sinishare din po namin sa ibang kasama namin po. Although po hindi po siya ganun karami, pero kaya naman po siyang i-budget sa kahit sino po na nangangailangan po ng bigas at dilata. Ganun po yung ginagawa po namin.
At saka simula kasi nung nag-farming kami, parang marami na kaming nasalamuhang mga tao. Yung parang ganun. Doon. Kasi dati po nung nagtatrabaho po ako, customer. Parang ganun. Hindi po talaga ako marunong makisalamuha sa mga tao. Kasi isa din po talaga akong hiyain. Parang ganun. Kaya, ang trabaho ko nung nagtatrabaho ako, bahay, trabaho. Hindi po talaga ako yung umaano sa karsada. Hindi po ako makita sa karsada. Makita ko sa karsada, doon lang sa papunta kong trabaho. Hindi po talaga. Kaya hindi, sabihin nila na hindi talaga daw ako pala kaibigan. Pero sa ngayon na nandito ako sa urban farming, kung sino-sino pong mga tao na parang masarap ba yung ganun. At least, kahit pag nandoon ka lang sa loob ng bahay, may stress ka po, di ba? Talagang hindi mo alam kung anong gagawin mo. At least pag nandito ka sa urban farming, sa pagtatanim, nakatulong na yung naging masaya ka na pagdating tapos may pagkain ka na, may pagtumubo, ganun. Yun nga lang, pag namatay o wala, paniwago na naman. Ganun. Pag saka pag na-pistis sila, pag pero malaking bagay po sa amin yun, kasi nga, isa na nagkaroon kami ng mga iba't ibang taong naging nakilala, nakasalamuha ang mga tao, talagang lumabas yung tapos nabawasan yung stress namin sa bahay. Ganun lang yung pagkain. Parang okay naman, yan. Masaya naman.
Sobrang payat ko, tapos hindi mo maintindihan, ayaw mo kumain, sobrang dami ng problema, ma'am. Tapos lagi po ako nagkukulong sa bahay, ma'am. Lagi po ako nagkukulong. Ayaw ko po makisalamuha sa ibang tao kasi sa sobrang stress ko, parang gusto ko pong suluhin. Pero simula po nung nandito ako sa urban farming, ma'am, doon ko po natutunan na ang problema pala, hindi mo kailangan suluhin. Kailangan may gagawin ka na nakakawala ng stress para maiwasan yung problema. Parang dito ko po nakita sa urban farming yung mga gawain na kung paano ma-resolve yung pagiging stressful mo, ma'am, na nangyayari sa iyo. Tapos doon po bumalik yung dati kong katawan, ma'am, na medyo tumaba ako. Parang wala na yung pagiging haggard mo. Although po nagtatanim ka po, ma'am, pero masarap po sa feeling, ma'am. Lalo na po yung nakikita mo yung mga kasama mo na ang saya-saya kasi sama-sama kami nagtatanim. Doon ko po naranasan na masaya rin pala yung ginagawa natin.
Yung parang trabaho mo doon sa probinsya ng bata ka pa, parang dito naranasan ulit. Parang binalikan mo yung ganun.
Paano po kaya natin pa mai-improve para mas mabahagi natin sa mas marami? Kasi yun, naririnig ko yung mga sagot niya, parang sana mas mabahagi pa natin to, sana lumawak to, okay. No? Ano po kaya?
Para sa akin po, ma'am, mas maganda rin po yung maghikayat pa po tayo ng maraming tao, ipakita natin na itong pagtatanim ay isang dahilan para makapagkita tayo ng marami, makikita din natin yung mga tao na natutuwa rin po sa pagtatanim. Tapos kahit naman po sabihin na lang natin na medyo hirap din kasi minsan po wala po tayong pera. Hirap din po sa pera kasi walang makukuha natin yung mga tao na hindi lang sa pera, saglit lang po yan, pero yung pagtatanim, yung mga gulay, nandyan po yan para araw-araw pagtawid po ito sa atin. Libre na po yun. Pagod lang po natin yung puhunan. Pero pag nandyan na po, masarap din po sa pakiramdam. Bukod sa pagsama-sama po sa mga yung support po natin sa WWD, ang ginagawa ko po sa kanila, pinapaintindi ko po sa kanila na kailangan natin to, kailangan ng ibang tao to. Kung hindi tayo lalaban, hindi natin makukuha yung mga hinihingi natin. Kasi kailangan din natin yun. Kung sa yung mga food packs na yun, halimbawa food packs, kailangan po natin yun eh. Sa atin din naman po yan. Kailangan mga tao, lalo na sa mga mahihirap po. Talagang wala na pong pinagkukuhanan. Doon po parang sinasabi ko sa kanila na laban natin to. Sabi sa kanila, magbigay kayo ng oras. Yung farm natin, kahit ilang oras lang naman po. Sabi ko sa kanila, kung makapunta tayo doon, ilang oras lang naman po ito, tiisin natin para hindi naman sa ating lahat to. Hindi yung pinaglalaban natin, hindi lang sa sarili natin, kundi sa ibang tao rin na nahihirapan tulad natin. Kaya yun po yung mga tao, parang lakas din po ng loob nila na sumama kasi siyempre, kung hindi mo kasi paintindi po sa tao yan na ganito yung pinaglalaban natin, ano yung pinaglalaban natin, kung hindi natin paintindihan, sabihin din po ng tao na, ay, ba't ka sasama dyan, mapapahamak lang ako niyan. Ganun po yung sinasabi ng iba. Pero pag pinaintindi mo pa talaga sa mga tao yan na hindi lang tayo ang makikinabang, kundi ibang tao na mas hirap pa sa atin. Kaya doon po sila nahihikayat din na sumama. Isang tawag ko lang po sa iba kong mga kasama, ma'am. Ongoing po talaga sila.
Hinuhugot na lang namin yung mga lakas namin sa katulad sa inyo, kay Ma'am Angeline, kay Ma'am Sara, yung parang ganun. Siyempre kasi, kung sa amin lang ganun. Siguro panghinaan din po kami, ganun. Kasi, hindi man namin ano yun. Siguro doon na lang kami po humuhugot sa mga nagsusuporta po sa amin. Yun, ganun. Tapos talagang, malaki talaga. Malaking pagbabago po talaga dati kaysa yung ngayon po. At least ngayon marami na kami naintindihan kung ano ba talaga.
Ako naman po, nakakahugot po ako bukod po sa inyo na wala rin humpay yung tulong sa amin. Kakahugot din po ako sa lakas ng loob doon sa mga taong nakikita ko na talagang hirap na nga po ako, mas hirap pa po sila sa akin. Doon po talaga ako humuhugot ng lakas na sabi ko, ipaglalaban ko to. Hindi para sa akin, hindi para sa kanila, kundi para sa ating lahat. Doon po ako humugot ng lakas na loob, lalo na po pag nakikita ko na ako, nakakakain po ako ng sapat, pero sila po, isang beses, dalawang beses sa isang araw. Parang doon po ako awang-awa. Parang doon lumalakas yung loob ko na sabi ko, go lang ng go. Huwag tayo susuko. Kailangan natin to. Kailangan ng ibang tao to. Kaya doon po rin lumalakas yung loob ko.
Okay. So thank you again for doing those interviews, and I'm sure we all experience the effects of the pandemic, no? And the gardens of resistance that emerged have been an invitation where we could all learn to be human again. And I think, like, I remember Tay was one of the first people who, in the midst of so much fear and scarcity, just came upon the scene and showed us how we could help others and feed other people. So I'd like to call on Tay from the vegan food sharing, the vegan neighbors, among Cure COVID and other things, to help me or to help create the space for a conversation. This is a place where we build collective power by building relationships. So we also have with us Rhea and Thelma, Angeline. Maybe they can introduce themselves. So if you'd like to ask a question and you can speak in Tagalog, you can do both English and Tagalog to help us out. But if not, they will also translate.
Okay.
So we'll open the
Sige
floor
po,
and we
mga,
can speak.
yeah. Ate Thelma, Rhea ba yan nandyan?
Oh.
Hindi makasama niya. Hello. Hello po. Ayan. So, yan. Kung meron pong mga meron pong mga magtatanong ha is sasagot po kayo sa kung saan kayo komportable. Na hindi nyo kailangan mag-English, pwede ko pong i-translate kung English yung tanong. At kung meron kayong hindi naintindihan, pwede nyo pong sabihin at i-translate po natin. Napakaganda po nung inyong kwento, napaka-emotional.
Lalakpakan tayo dyan.
Yes. Sobrang inspiring po ng inyong...
Ano yan?
Yeah. Talagang kailangan ng solidarity at ng yung pagkatao, no, pagiging makatao natin. Kahit nasa kayong mga pinakamahihirap na section ng natin, ng lipunan natin, ay naiisip nyo pa rin na kahit naghihirap kayo ay tumulong at gumawa para dun sa mga mas mahirap pa kayo sa inyo. Kaya talagang it's a very inspiring stories, no, na shinare ninyo. Syempre. And I'm so proud to be part of Food Today, Food Tomorrow for facilitating these initiatives. So, yes, everyone, kung meron na po kayong mga tanong, questions, please just let us know. You can ask yung mga members ng communities din natin po.
Sige po. Our panel is ready for your question.
Ayun pala, Angeline ikaw na.
May tinatago.
Parang hindi yata makapagtanong yung mga tao kasi malinaw yung kwento nila. But kung may mga tanong din po yung ibang friends here and in the States about the initiative, about everything na we saw sa video, kahit sa presentation ni Chester, please feel free to do so.
Charlene, do you mind, or Tay, can y'all just, I know that was Taglish. I don't think everyone here speaks Tagalog. So just, English ulit.
What they said?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, sorry. So I was just talking to the community and was saying how inspiring their stories are and how this actually is the core of this movement, this initiative that we created. Well, Food Today, Food Tomorrow is very much built on the power of the community and their dedication and their will to support the initiative, not only for themselves but to those who are even experiencing worse situation or in a poorer situation than they are. So I was telling them that it's really it's so emotional to listen to their stories, and I'm just so proud to be part of this movement of humanity. I was just telling them, and then I'm opening the floor to, if there are questions, you can ask to our community members who are there at the Kadamay office now, or even to Chester's presentation. And I was also telling them that they can also ask their questions if they have. Yeah.
I'll start. Not planted. yung tanong ko po, parang gaano ka-involved po yung mga kasama nyo sa bahay or yung pamilya nyo, how did it affect them? Ano yung effect sa kanila ng pagsama sa Kusinang Bayan or Food Today, Food Tomorrow?
Ayun. Para po sa inyo na Thelma.
So in English, I asked to what extent is your family involved, or how did it affect them in terms of your everyday experience to be part of a community, in joining either the community kitchens or the gardens?
Nakuha niyo po yun, Nay? Rhea? Naintindihan niya? Sige, go.
Sa community naman po ng
sa pamilya ko po, para po sa akin, malaking tulong po yung kusinang bayan. Kasi po, sa panahon po ngayon, yung isa po ang asawa ko sa nawalan ng trabaho, ng nag-lockdown, then ang nag-support po sa amin as of now, yung yung cost buy ng FTFT. Yun po yung doon po kami kumukuha ng pangluto, doon po kami lalo po sa lahat ng mga miyembro na nawalan ng trabaho. Nagbibigay po kami sa kanila ng lutong ulam tsaka lutong kanin.
Ate, pero yung paano kayo tinutulungan ng pamilya niyo? Ano yung reaction ng pamilya ninyo sa usapin ng pagiging pagsama ninyo sa kusinang bayan saka sa FTFT ng mga hindi sa urban gardens? Anong sinasabi ng ibang mga miyembro ng pamilya niyo?
Natutuwa naman po kasi po pangdagdag na lang din po yun sa nila, sa pang-araw-araw, kahit minsan isang beses lang po sa isang linggo nagagawa yung kusinang bayan. At least po po sa kanila, nakakatulong po.
Okay. Sila Nanay Telma po. Ano pong masasabi na inyong mga kapamilya sa inyong pagsali sa sa mga inisyatiba natin sa FTFT?
Naman po sila, okay naman po sa kanila kasi at least marami din po na itutulong po, nakakatulong po. Kahit pa minsan-minsan lang po, isang bisis sa isang linggo, okay naman po siya. Kasi katulad nga sa akin, solo parents, talagang wala talagang yun. Talagang malaking bagay po sa kanila.
Pati yung pagtatanim po ninyo?
Opo.
Okay. Salamat po. So to answer Charlene's question, no? So they were first in the beginning. Rhea was saying, they were saying that their families are grateful, no, and it's the initiatives are welcome, and that it's able to support them even if the community kitchens are just once a week. It's already a big support, no, help to support their survival. And their family members are happy that they're doing these initiatives. Yeah, that they're involved with the community kitchens and the urban gardening initiatives.
Thanks, Tay.
Thank you po. Salamat.
Shall we go with Patricia's question? I'll read it
Sige.
out. How big of a role does the LGU take part in this initiative? How do we make it a communal effort when LGUs are non-cooperative or indifferent to their own community's plight?
Char, gusto mo?
So, anong papel ng LGU dito? Parang kasama ba ang LGU at paano sila masasama sa initiative na to? Lalo na, mandate nila to, no? Parang responsibility nila to. So, paano natin masasali ang LGU dito?
Baka pwedeng sa dalawang levels natin siya sagutin, no? Maybe we can answer this in two levels. One, sa community, tatanungin natin paano raw po nakatulong yung LGU, ano yung papel ng LGU dito sa ating mga initiatives na ito, at paano natin sila napapasama. Tapos siguro isang level din pa yung FTFT din itself, no? Parang paano natin na-facilitate din yung yung LGU. So unahin natin sa inyo, Nay, Telma, sa kayo mga kasama niyo dyan. Ano po yung papel ng LGU? Ano po yung papel ng LGU dito sa mga initiatives na ito? At paano natin sila na-engganyo na makialam or sumama, tumulong sa atin? Nakuha nyo? Sige, Angeline, go.
Si Ate Telma, ayaw niyang sagutin kasi parang ang tingin nila bilang mga urban farmers, hindi ganun nakatulong yung LGU sa kanila. Parang kung hindi pa ito inumpisahan ng FTFT na magbigay ng mga gamit at hindi sila makakapagbungkal. Parang ganun yung sagot niya. Kaya parang hindi niya ini-involve yung LGU dito. Ang naging papel lang nila is, kumbaga, nangialam yung LGU nung panahon na nakapag-start na yung FTFT doon na kumbaga makapagbigay ng mga gamit para makapagtanim sila, makapagbigay ng mga buto na itatanim, ganun siya. Kumbaga, doon lang parang nagising yung LGU na gusto nilang tumulong para kumbaga may part sila, may bahagi sila dun sa ginagawa na inisyatiba ng mga magsasaka sa local. Kumbaga, yung ang tinutukoy natin yung doon sa Bagong Silangan. Mas yun.
Okay. Wala na idadagdag? Okay na yan? Sige. Okay. So what they were saying, what Angeline was saying was that they didn't want to answer, but they were saying that the government, the LGU did not really help them in their specific community in terms of the initiatives, and that because it was FTFT which started it in their community, and then the LGU only came in when they saw that there were already like seeds, farm implements, and then the program was already starting. It was the only time when the LGU came in. So for them, they didn't really want to get the LGUs involved in their specific community because they saw that there was no like initiative from the government to look into that, no, to do the gardening. Well, for context, there is a program by the local government unit in Quezon City that is also urban farming. But Quezon City is a very big city, and there are so many communities, and I would say the LGU program is very much connected with the mayor. No, so I don't know how they actually choose, if they are really choosing any community. But Bagong Silangan, where they are living, is a very big community as well. It's a very big barangay. So there are so many. There are a lot of actually hectares and hectares of land that can be that can be turned into urban gardens easily, because that's what they did. The community did. No, they were just given seeds and some farm implements, and then they were able to farm. So there are many other areas in the specific barangay that has a lot of space that can, if the government wants to, can be turned into productive gardens. Yeah. So on our part, Shar, do you want to answer like how we got the LGU also involved in this initiative?
Well, I was going to ask you and Chester if there are examples of formal agreement. I mean, we did try, we talked to the QC government, but they were at a level that weren't, quite that supportive, or couldn't think of how they could directly support us. But what I heard from the stories that we've had with Angeline and others is that when we start something, that's when the LGU begins to see, oh, okay, now we have to move because not the citizens are acting. So it becomes a means for them to then ask for their rights. But I haven't actually seen a way for us to formally,
have
work
partnership.
with them. Yeah, it would be nice if they gave us land, if there's anyone listening.
Yeah. But also, I think one fundamental difference is that I think the LGU, or even the Department of Agriculture, if I'm not mistaken, here in Quezon City, they don't have, because ours is agroecology based, is organic farming. That's what we do. And then the urban farming in LGU, I don't think it's completely organic. So I remember we had this discussion that we cannot have that be facilitated by us, because we are pushing for agroecology, we're pushing for organic farming, and we want to change the food system eventually. No, that's why their kind of program in urban farming is very opposite with what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Tay. I think Chester would like to add to that.
Yeah, there's a program in Quezon City on urban farming, but I think it's more environmental and economic, in the sense that it wants people who are poor to get some sort of additional income, but it's less political in the way that Tay is talking about, right? So I'm not sure whether they're going to support agroecology initiatives, or even initiatives that empower the poor later in order to resist evictions, right? So we have to remember that a lot of these communities that are urban poor are resting illegally on these spaces. And for a long time, LGUs and the national government have been refusing to provide social services, road construction, drainage constructions, because these are sites for eviction later, right? So the government views any investments on these communities as something that's one, going to be wasted in the future because they're going to be evicted. And second, it doesn't want to encourage more slums, right? So partnering with LGU has to be a little bit cautious in the sense that LGUs, of course, is not homogeneous. There are people in the LGUs that we can talk to, but by and large, the history of government and local governments is that they're not very supportive of slum enactments. Right? The other thing is that LGUs are also in partnership with the actual real estate corporations that evict the poor, right? And since the 1990s, LGUs have been critical sites for interrogation and contestations because, for instance, in San Roque, it was the LGU that was a primary proponent of the partnership with a very large real estate that would evict the poor, when in fact the community was sitting on a site that was owned by the National Housing Authority. The very state agency provided tasked to provide housing for the poor. So the clientele was there, the poor were there, the land is there. It was owned by the National Housing Authority, the very agency tasked to provide housing for the people who are already there. But instead of doing that and talking to the poor, they actually talked to the real estate companies because they viewed the land as having very high market value that could not be affordable to the poor if it were sold to the poor, right? So I'm not saying we should not talk to the LGU, but the LGU also needs to be interrogated critically, and which aspect of the LGU that we can actually talk to. Right?
Okay, let me quickly translate that sa kila Ate Telma. So Ate Telma, ang mga ate dyan, sinasabi po ni Chester na mahirap talagang makipag-partner sa LGU kasi unang-una hindi tayo pareho ng pinagmumulan. Sila, yung LGU, actually, meron din silang program pero hindi tayo sigurado kung susuportahan ba nila yung klase ng program na gusto natin in terms of sa gardening, no? Hindi rin natin maasahan yung LGU na maging sumuporta sa mga inisyatiba ng mga communities na political o kaya ay merong paglaban, no? Kasi unang-una yung yung mga programs din ng LGU, halimbawa sa San Roque, actually paraan to para yung mga lugar ng mga tinitirhan natin ay plano nila na i-evict o i-demolish yung mga tao para magbigay daan sa sa development sa kanilang pagtingin. Samantalang tayo gusto nating manatili ang mga tao doon at paunlarin ng communities ang kanilang sariling community. Medyo magkaiba tayo doon ng layunin sa sa LGU, kaya kung may kipag-partner tayo sa kanya, may mga tao kasing okay doon sa mga LGUs, pero medyo maingat tayo dahil nga maaaring may mga conflict o may pagkakaiba tayo ng mga interest sa kanila. Ayun siguro sa short na. Thank you.
Thanks, Day. So I'm aware of the time, so I think unless there are really pressing ones, I'll take these as the last questions. So Elaine had a question, are there community gardens in schools? May mga community gardens sa mga eskwelahan? And ilang community gardens sa isang barangay? How many community gardens are there in a neighborhood?
Do you want to answer?
Yeah,
answer
so, so yeah, there's a, ano nga tawag doon? There is a program for community gardens in public schools. However, as we know with the pandemic, everything has just stopped, right? So it wasn't really a site for people to actually get food. And I think their effectivity also, I'm not sure how effective they are, but there is at least that effort. Okay.
Char,
yes.
I'd just like to add na yan, meron yung mga lumad schools sa Mindanao. Gumagawa talaga sila ng mga community gardens at in fact bahagi yun ng kanilang curriculum, no? So growing community gardens is part of the curriculum of lumad schools in Mindanao in particular, and they're one of the victims of red tagging and militarization ganyan ng ating gobyerno, no? So yan, I just want to point out, and in fact yung Makisasaw na libro, gusto naming gumawa rin yan with Sinatay ng parang libro na katulad nung nilabas ng mga lumad children and teachers nung nakaraan, no. Ano yun? I forget the exact title, pero parang it's a manual of sorts on community gardening, and I think it would be helpful also to communities and to individuals who want to who would want to create their own community gardens. So mas parang ganoon yung tinatanaw din ng Makisasaw bilang libro, na sana mas ma-document yung mga practice ng mga halimbawa ng mga lumad students at saka ng mga community gardens na ginawa ng Food Today, Food Tomorrow. And then bukod sa madokumento yung mga kwentong ito, ay maturuan din yung ibang mga communities at ibang mga grupo na gumawa ng sariling community garden.
Thanks, Faye. I think that also answers Janelle's question. So I think the one last important question is, how can Filipinos in the diaspora support community gardens in the homeland? So paano nga makakatulong ang mga Pilipino sa ibang bansa, sa atin, sa mga community garden dito and that whole movement, yung buong laban? Paano nga?
Sinong nating yung community siguro, pwede natin tanungin sila Nanay Telma. Nanay Telma, tinatanong po ng mga friends natin sa US, paano sila makakatulong para sa pagpapatuloy at pagdami ng community gardens? Paano nila matutulungan, masusuportahan yung mga ginagawa natin sa ating communities dito sa Pilipinas? Ang tingin nyo? Paano kaya? Ha? At halimbawa ako, taga-US ako, tapos narinig ko yung kwento ninyo, gusto kayong tulungan. Paano kayo matutulungan?
Ako na nga.
Ano, Rhea?
Hello po, sir. Sa akin po, para po sa akin, kung paano po matuloy-tuloy yung pagkakatulong sa amin, tuloy-tuloy lang po yung paghikayat sa tao na magtanim ng magtanim. Sa inyo rin po, para din po patuloy rin na mahikayat din po yung mga tao. Ano ba yun? Wala ko sa talaga eh.
I think ang paraan is i-support ng mga friends from the US ang Slow Food Sari-sari, ang Food Today, Food Tomorrow, para directly tayo sa communities. I think one way is giving donations, because we need money to continue with the gardens and to facilitate more gardens. That's one. And also support yung mga campaigns ng community, like their community is supporting this for the 118 hectares that's unoccupied and unproductive. They have that campaign so that they can enter in that site, and also they're campaigning now for aid, 10,000 peso aid for each family affected by the pandemic. So that's their campaign, and those are the campaigns. So maybe friends from the US we can talk more about this, and you can support the initiatives of Food Today, Food Tomorrow. And with the Food Today, Food Tomorrow, kasi it's not only about gardening, but we're bringing the context of the communities. No, so we're not only planting vegetables. By planting vegetables, we're also, like what Chester was saying, this is a political act. These are gardens of resistance. So there are a lot of political context behind that. And also buy the Makisasaw book. No, you can support by buying our cookbook. That will be a lot of help. Oh yeah, Chester is raising his hand.
Pwedeng pasingit lang. I'll go ahead. So yes, the Makisasaw cookbook wasn't just like something that we wanted to do. It was really meant for fundraising. While at the beginning of the pandemic, donations were pouring in that allowed us to do this, to sustain it over time. I mean, the situation of the poor has not changed, but to sustain it over time has taken a lot of work and like continually believing in each other that we've all got each other's backs. So if you can be part of that circle by purchasing a copy of the book, sharing the word, or volunteering, we'd really appreciate it. Secondly, I think we heard from Chester how the state doesn't quite recognize people as people. And for us to uphold their right, I think to stand with them and then to continue work like this recognizes their right to a place in the city and their right to feed themselves. So yeah, keep involved. Chester, you can go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, right? The other thing is really to begin to recognize the link between struggles in the United States of the workers and the poor with the struggles of the Filipino urban poor. Because these are struggles that are really born by the exclusions of a larger system that we need to question and recognize. Right? So if you're members of local organizations in the United States, it would be good to have more activities like this and begin to think about how the struggles of the Filipino urban poor are actually linked to the very struggles of the workers there in the United States.
Great, thanks, Chester. And so one of the slogans of Food Today, Food Tomorrow was solidarity, not charity. And so this is not something that we're doing for other people, it's doing for us as well. And we'd like to invite at this point Astig Vegan, RG, to share with us her experience of Makisasaw. So RG Enriquez Diaz is the creator and founder of Astig Vegan, a global brand dedicated to all things vegan Filipino. Through her trusted recipes, RG has become one of the leading voices in vegan Filipino cooking. Her mission is to show the world that Filipino food can be vegan, healthy, and delicious without losing its soul.
Thank you, Celine. Thank you, everyone. And I'm very humbled and honored to be here. Kamusta po kayong lahat dyan? Wherever you are, have a good day sa inyong lahat in LA. And yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be part of this cookbook for the second time. I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about the issues, especially having migrated to the US. But coming back in 2019 and then now, starting 2021, coming back to the motherland and being reminded once again of the disparity and of all the issues that, the disparity between the poor and the rich and all the scenarios that kind of honestly really I felt bogged down. I don't know if it was culture shock or something because it's not like I didn't grow up seeing it, but it reminded me. And just like one of the interviewees who said na sabi niya yung problema niya daw akala niya kailangan niya solohin. It really reminded me, even though I was just a witness of this, just like seeing the scenarios unfold in front of me, the different scenes in front of me, I already felt sad, let alone I would imagine if I'm the one in their shoes experiencing it. So it really affected me. And when I was able to volunteer and get involved, naging makisaw din in the community when I volunteer for Veg Fest sa Payatas. I got to know me and my husband, we were there doing the demo, but also the food distribution. Tapos we also, I was also lucky enough to also be part of the book launch sa Bagong Silangan. It really I felt revived and inspired instead of that feeling of apathy and helplessness. It was replaced by empowerment, hope, inspiration, and joy even. And so to be part of this book and to be part of this initiative, to get involved is actually, in the beginning, I thought it would be too heavy and it will be something that, it's intimidating, but it's actually very empowering. And it's an act of self-care in that sense. It's an act of self-kindness and to myself, but also to other people, because now hindi ko na kailangan solohin. Like, I actually feel like it's a shared effort, and it really uplifts the spirit. So as I was watching the interviews, reminded me that it's not just financial help that they're that's important, but also the emotional and mental health, the camaraderie, that is also very important to feel that we feel empowered. And so thank you so much to the to everyone involved. Shirley, thank you for having me as well today. It's an honor, and I will definitely try to reflect more and try to digest, pun intended, more of what I have learned from today. Kaya maraming pong salamat for having me.
Thank you, RG. I think it's been a collective education for all of us in spaces like this and through activities like this. Yeah, so pending your visit to Payatas, everyone, you can get organized.
Yay.
So one way to really speak of the issues is to get organized with Malaya. You can see their organized link on screen. You can find a copy of Makisasaw in the US and in different distributors all over the Philippines, and you can volunteer. So yeah, connect with us. So thank you all for being here. I'd especially like to thank Ate Letlet, Ria, Thelma, Catch, JL, Mabi, Carla, Carissa, Angeline, who all put the videos together. Angeline and Jonas for translating, Elaine and Erica, our friends from the US, who've sprung upon the scene to put up the poster and do tech run. It's been great. Chester, of course, Faye, RG, and Faye for speaking, for being on screen and sharing your story. And to Tia Chucha for agreeing to say yes without knowing me or and being standing with us. So thanks everyone for being here. Please do keep in touch. Let this be a beginning of growing our collective power.